Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the program. After a long conversation in Mar-a-Lago, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky receives a 15-year security guarantee from the United States. Rami Gonen's story of sexual violence in the hands of Hamas militants in Gaza following the October 7 attack on Israel goes viral. Plus, Thailand's army accuses Cambodia of breaching a newly signed ceasefire deal. Let's begin the world today. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's talks with U.S. President Donald Trump progressed to the point where he could say an agreement on a peace plan in Ukraine is up to 95% done. The U.S. offered Ukraine security guarantees for 15 years, but Zelensky said he would have liked guarantees for up to 50. It outlined territorial issues and the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant as the last unresolved matters, with little said on the future of Ukraine's contested Donbas region. Russian media reported that though the Kremlin had rejected key parts of the Trump-brokered peace plan, it had agreed with Trump's assessment that peace is closer. When he spoke to reporters after their talks on Sunday in Florida, President Zelensky repeated his belief that an overall peace agreement was 90% of the way there. Both the U.S. and Ukrainian leaders also indicated that there had been progress in one key sticking point: security guarantees for Ukraine. News agency reports that he hoped that any security guarantees would begin the moment Kyiv signs a peace deal. Well, following the talks with the U.S. President Zelensky told journalists any plan on Ukraine must be signed by four sides: Ukraine, Europe, America, and Russia, and that he hopes to move forward quickly and is open to any format meetings. Zelensky says he wants to host a meeting with European and U.S. officials in the coming days to work on documents to end the war.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank President Trump for a great meeting at this amazing place in his home in Mar-a-Lago. And we had a really great discussions on all the topics, and we appreciate the progress that was made by American and Ukrainian teams in these recent weeks. Special thanks to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and thank you for their engagement and full commitment, and also to our team, and first of all to Rustem Umerov and General Gnatov, and to all our teams. And we discussed all the aspects of the peace framework, which includes, and we have a great achievements, 20-point peace plan, 90% agreed, and U.S.-Ukraine security guarantees 100% agreed. U.S.-Europe-Ukraine security guarantees almost agreed. Military dimension 100% agreed. Prosperity plan being finalized, and we also discussed the sequencing of the following actions. And we agree that security guarantees is a key milestone in achieving lasting peace, and our teams will continue working on all aspects. We also had a joint productive call with European leaders, like President Trump said already, and a lot of leaders, including NATO and the EU. And we agreed that our teams will meet in upcoming weeks to finalize all discussed matters, and we agreed with President Trump that he will host us, and maybe in Washington, European leaders and Ukrainian delegation, yes, in January. And Ukraine is ready for peace. And once again, would like to thank President Trump for a warm welcome and substantial discussion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. Joining us now is Global Policy Advisor Valentine Atrum, who joins us from Gelderland in the Netherlands. Valentine, thank you for joining us on the program today. President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president both held talks in Mar-a-Lago on Sunday. And while President Trump says that progress has been made, both sides did not make any breakthrough in their talks that lasted hours. It would not be the first time that both have held talks about the 20-point peace plan for Ukraine and for Russia, which was expanded by President Zelensky. Trump also had a conversation with the Russian president before the meeting yesterday. Do you think the U.S. president is serious about these conversations with Ukraine and is really looking forward to a plan that works for Ukraine as well as Russia?
Okay, thank you very much for having me, Amarachi. So, whether the president, Donald Trump, is serious or not, I think it's important that we look at it from three perspectives, which is from the point of view of what does Trump really want from this deal? And secondly, what he even understands from this deal. And thirdly, whether the deal is even possible. You know, so you asked me, is Trump dead set on making a deal? I would say absolutely. He's all on this. He's talking to Trump and Zelensky himself. He's even got his son-in-law and other close allies working the back channels. So for him, this is the ultimate chance to prove that he's the master deal maker. You might want to call it a sort of Nixon goes to China moment for him. So he really wants this badly. But does he genuinely cares about Ukraine's long-term security? I think that's more important. That's the most important issue. And for me, it's not really a primary goal for him. It seems like Ukraine's safety is just a box to check, not the main points. And you would see that the clearest sign of this was the summit just yesterday when he mentioned that Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed. And he even went as far as calling Putin very generous. So, but from Trump's view, he probably thinks success means business and cheap Russian gas. In his mind, if Russia is selling to Ukraine, then that's a win. He is completely missing how Russia uses that as a dependence, as a tool of dependence, a political weapon against Ukraine. From Zelensky's view, you could see yesterday that it was surreal. His capital was just bombed. His capital was just bombed. And hearing the US president call the man who ordered that attack generous, it was sort of absurd. And it made him even laugh. And it was a pure diplomatic disbelief. And this goes to show that Trump either doesn't get or chooses to ignore, what this war really is for Ukraine, which is a fight for survival. He's treating it like a bad business dispute and not an invasion.
I'm even wondering, what the 15-year guarantees are really, what that really means for Ukraine, bearing in mind that Ukraine might lose territory in the end. In fact, it is almost guaranteed right now that Ukraine will lose territory in order to have peace with Russia. And they will also be giving the U.S. access to the earth minerals. What sort of future lies ahead for this country?
So 15 years guarantee as what? The thing is, this number isn't random. In the business world, which Donald Trump happens to belong, 15 years is the standard timeline for major projects. And think about building a huge mine or network of factories. This tells you the deal is likely designed to create a sort of stable window to protect big American investments, especially in Ukraine's valuable minerals and infrastructure. And the US government says the deal is extendable, but makes it clear it's not permanent. It's mostly a business lease on security and not a forever promise. Unsurprisingly, Zelensky, Ukraine is looking at this 15-year offer disapprovingly. They are pushing for 30, 40, or maybe even 50 years, because the war with Russia has already lasted about 15 years. That's if you start counting from 2014. So a 15-year guarantee just feels like a long time out, giving Russia a chance to maybe rebuild its army for the next round. And Ukraine simply wants a guarantee that spans generations to tie the US government to its defense, no matter who becomes president of the US subsequently. And
sorry, go on.
Okay.
Go on.
Here's the real catch. This security promise, it's unconditional. It has a major loophole to mostly protect the US. So the rule is the American guarantee is void if Ukraine attacks Russian territory first without being provoked. But what's the reality? The reality we see is that this freezes the conflict. It makes Ukraine officially gives up its rights, to use force to take back its occupied land. And it must remain purely on the defensive. In return, America's protection basically activates immediately, but only if Russia, attacks first. So you see the problem. It feels completely one-sided. Ukraine has to just sit back with its hand tied, watching its land basically remain occupied and can only get help if it waits for Russia to strike again. So the power to restart the war thus triggers the American guarantee rests entirely on Moscow, basically, on Russia. And there are about three. Okay, yeah.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead, please.
Valentine. Sorry to cut in. You're making so much sense and just really enjoying the analysis coming from you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. This means you have to come back on the program, for more analysis. But thank you again for making time out to be with us during this holiday period. And Merry Christmas to you once again.
Merry Christmas, Marachi. My pleasure.
Former Israeli hostage Romi Gonen, who was kidnapped during the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, has recounted her harrowing ordeal with the militants in Gaza. She told Israeli media she was sexually assaulted by 4 different men during her time as a hostage. Her first assault, she says, happened on her 4th day in captivity, the abuser being a doctor who was tasked with caring for her injuries sustained during the Hamas-led attack on her abduction. He had followed her to have a shower because he's a nurse, and he came to help her in the shower. And even after the assault, she had to continue living with him in the house. Her next attacker, she says, was a cameraman who filmed clips of her for propaganda purposes. The cameraman, Muhammad, and another man whom she called Ibrahim, assaulted her. This went on for about 16 days. Her worst single attack came later when another captor in another house followed her into the toilet and assaulted her for some 30 minutes. Afterwards, she says, the world was spinning. All that went through my head was, Romi, everyone in Israel thinks you're dead and you're going to be a sex slave in captivity. Her words. Romi was in Hamas captivity for more than 470 days. Joining us now is women's rights activist and advocate for the victims of the October 7 attack and expert in sexual violence law, Ayelet Rezin Bet-Or. She joins us from Jerusalem. Ayelet, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me on this important subject. Thank you.
Romi's experience, how she remembers the details, how she recounts it, it shows she's had a lot of time, to come to terms with the assault in captivity. Do you think she's recovered or is on the road to recovery or seeking justice for what happened to her?
Well, in the world of trauma, I can never speak about recovery or full recovery. The clarity and the detail in Romi's testimony does not mean she has moved on. It means that she survived long enough to understand what happened to her. Trauma doesn't disappear because someone can speak about it clearly, obviously. Often it's the opposite. People speak only after long periods of silence, processing, and inner struggle. I wouldn't say she's recovered. I would say she's on a road, a long one, that includes healing, but also truth telling and demanding justice for her and the other victims. For many, many survivors, the speaking publicly is not the closure. It's demanding responsibility, a way to make sure what happened to them is not erased or denied. And unfortunately, in regard to the Israeli hostages, and sexual victims the sexual assault victims of October 7th, there were very strong forces of denial and minimalism from the world.
Yeah, and sadly so. I think, for many victims of sexual violence and assault, that unfortunately is the experience. But Amnesty International has released a report on the October 7 attack. It accuses Hamas of crimes against humanity. There are others who do say that Israel's retaliation is also a crime against humanity. What can be done with the Amnesty report? What does he hope to achieve, though?
Those are two separate questions. I'll say that the Amnesty report is important, but I must say, it's too little too late. 2 years after, more than 2 years after the attack and the hostages coming back and survivors and eyewitnesses and the forensics evidence that we have and the footage that we have, stating the obvious is, again, too little, too late. It is important in international law for the recognition. I'm not minimalizing that, but it seems that I got the sense that Amnesty saw the evidence, but it chose not to say what, the full message it should have said, to demand accountability for the perpetrators, to talk about the systematic attack, the pre-planned the cages that were prepared for the hostages, the sexual assault, the abuse, the psychological terror, the torture they went through. All that is not enough recognized. And also I have to say in regard to, that balancing trend, I totally dismiss that. International law does not work as a moral balance sheet. Crimes committed by one party do not cancel crimes committed if committed by others. So if Amnesty recognizes these crimes, they need to call them out as they are, and to point out the perpetrators, which are very clear here. There's no question, especially in regard to the perpetrators who held the hostages and captives. So they didn't take the brave step, the brave step they should have, and fell into the trap of being balanced or I don't know, politically correct. In the name of politically correct, they did not give the victims, the brave sexual assault victims who came forward, men and women, and also children and minors who spoke out, and they did not give them the full recognition they deserve. And that is a betrayal of their role as a human rights advocacy organization.
I don't want to dismiss the importance of this conversation, but quickly, could you tell us the sentiment in Israel since the release of the Amnesty report, and especially since Romy recounted her story?
So Romy she bravely spoke about the four sexual assault. She shared 4 sexual assault incidents that were part of her captivity experience, but there was a long line of sexual assault victims, hostages that came back from captive. Like I said, men and women who experienced gender-based violence, and each testimony like this is received in great respect and modesty, and she's in Israel. She's getting a huge hug and support, and she's surrounded by medical professionals, and I know also mental health professionals who are part of this long path of recovery. But again, Romy and the other victims and all Israelis, and I'll also take a step forward and say all sexual assault victims are expecting this recognition, these crimes to be clean of politics. And the world, different human rights organizations, different UN organizations, different UN experts and professionals, some have recognized this as these crimes as they are, but some have failed. For instance, the special repertoire on sexual assault against women and girls has denied that there is evidence on the sexual assault crimes committed on October 7th and captive. And she's repeatedly denying that.
Right.
And I asked, how can any victim around the world look up to this professional, international professional who is, she's my representative, your representative, of all women. She's supposedly of all women and girls.
Life. She is scarred for life, Ayelet. I mean, a doctor being raped by a doctor, being raped by, someone who is supposed to be guarding you, and then also being raped by a fellow captor. I can't imagine what exactly, she's gone through, and thoughts and prayers are with her and with others who have suffered the same ordeal or something similar. We do not dismiss their feelings or their trauma. Thank you again, Eyelet.
Thank you so much for these strong words, and I'll make sure that it will be passed on to the victims who I know of. Thank you so much for that. It's so important.
Thank you. And as we end the program today, the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission has reacted to an open letter by Amnesty International urging President Bola Tinubu to intervene in the case of Sulaiman Olufemi, a Nigerian who has spent more than 20 years on death row in Saudi Arabia. NIDCOM says while Amnesty International claims to be seeking his release, the organization has failed to present the full facts of the case. Olufemi had traveled to Saudi Arabia for the Lesser Hajj and was later arrested in Jeddah after a police officer was killed, while others received prison sentences. He was handed the death penalty. After years of diplomatic engagements, the victim's family demanded blood money amounting to $570,000. NIDCOM, working with Nigerians in Saudi Arabia, raised the funds with support from Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu and Seyi Tinubu, the son of the president. And the money has now been paid, and Nigerian diplomatic officials are engaging Saudi authorities with hopes that Olufemi will soon be released to return home to his family. That's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.